So today I'm going to talk a little bit about when to pull back in a gaining phase, knowing how to spot these signs of when it would be good to pull back in order to then catapult yourself into that next push up or gaining phase, if you like. So it's really important to be able to notice and address these signs and symptoms if they start to occur. Now, one of the first things is going to be, of course, visual body fat coming down. So this is going to be person dependent in terms of realistically how much body fat one person can manage and still be able to perform optimally, sleep, recover, and all these different variables, as opposed to someone else. Now, in some instances, some people can just push their body weight higher, have more visual adiposity come down, and still sustain a high level of performance, whereby other people, once they start getting to that point where some body fats come down, that threshold is much sooner or much lower, if you like. So this is all going to be person dependent, as anything is, but just a few things to look out for. So the first one being visual body fat coming down, specifically around the midsection, that kind of abdominal area for males, and then more sort of around the upper thigh, the glutes, the hamstrings, the legs, if you like, for the female athletes. So visual body fat coming down, and this, of course, coincides with body weight. Now, body weight and body fat being high are going to have their own ramifications on the body. Now, one of which is going to be high blood pressure. So if you're taking, your blood pressure readings on a week-to-week basis and seeing where that is at, now there's obviously other factors that are going to coincide with that, such as being assisted or not. But overall, we start to seeing that blood pressure creep up. We have to start seeing that as a consideration when it's time to pull back. Now, as I said, there's going to be obviously, skews and variations to this, of course, if you're assisted or not, and kind of where your natural blood pressure lies. Some people just genetically have a lower blood pressure, some people genetically have a higher blood pressure. But if you're starting to see relative to where you normally are situated, that creeping up sort of, maybe 15 to 20 markers on diastolic and systolic, systolic in particular, then we know that might be a sign that, okay, we may need to pull back relative to where body fat, relative to where body weight is at that point in time. As a rough marker, we're always looking around about 120/80 as an optimal, if you like. But we also have to consider, again, if we are running assistance, there's always going to be that slightly higher threshold. That's just one of the ramifications of running assistance. So that's a couple of things to coincide with each other. Now, of course, as you are getting heavier and as you are finding that body weight is creeping up, one of the ramifications that is going to have is your aerobic ability, right? So your respiratory, your cardiovascular system. If you're finding that you're basically becoming unfit, so you're struggling to walk up and down the stairs, you're struggling to take your dog for a walk, you're struggling to walk to the kitchen and back, all these different things, if you're starting to notice that you're getting out of breath much easier, that could be a sign that you need to pull back. Now, if we put this into, your training performance, if you're starting to allow your aerobic system to become compromised, that's going to massively hinder your ability to actually train. Anything above 4 or 5 reps is going to start to feel much more of a struggle. So one thing you often find, if we flip it around, is a lot of people who have been gaining for a long period of time, they've got food intake up, they've got body weight up, they start to notice a deterioration in their aerobic system. One thing you'll often find is once they pull that first 10-15 pounds of body fat off and actually start, reintroducing higher amounts of cardiovascular work and improving their CV system, they start to notice their training improves because they're more aerobically equipped. Now, obviously, resistance training is what we call anaerobic training. So it's without the presence of oxygen to a degree, as opposed to, say, aerobic training, where in that higher heart rate, the higher threshold. So because of this, a lot of people think, we don't need to do cardio in a gaining phase, in an off-season phase. If you don't, and you allow your aerobic system to slip, it will start to affect your performance. And not only your performance, but also other factors such as, your ability to partition nutrients, to absorb food, gut motility, your recovery, your sleep, and all these different factors. So if we're starting to see a decline in aerobic fitness, that could be another sign that we need to pull back. Of course, the skew in blood work is going to be one of the main factors. So if you're assisted, and even if you're not assisted, you're running blood work and you're starting to see that some of these different markers are becoming skewed. Some of the main ones that we're going to potentially see skewed when we are in a gaining phase and we're really pushing body weight is your triglycerides, your cholesterol levels, your lipid profile in general, which is a byproduct of just having, enlarged fat cells and just being in a surplus and consuming more food, specifically refined food, sugars and fats and things like that. And if we're starting to see a massive skew in those or any other of your markers, of course, the liver, which is responsible for detoxing, everything runs through the liver. Of course, your red and white blood cells, your kidneys, all these different markers that we stay on top of. If you're starting to see some of these are out of whack, that's another sign. Now, on top of that, we had to think about your appetite, right? Because if you cannot eat, if you lose the ability to eat, you then lose the ability to grow. And the second your appetite is completely on its ass, you're not going to get that back until you then diet again or initiate a mini cut or whatever it is. So if we cannot no longer eat, yes, of course, you will get to the point where you can force feed for a short period of time, but having to force feed where appetite is completely gone is not only very, very difficult and unenjoyable, but it's not really a sustainable approach that you can continue to take. It's going to cause stress on the body. It's going to cause stress in general, knowing that you are full and you've got to continue to eat. It can potentially make you feel sick, and of course it could then have its ramifications on your digestive system, which then kind of correlates with the next pillar of this, if you like, and that is your digestive function. So it's not just about what you can eat, but it's what you can absorb. So it's all very well throwing the food in, but if your body's not actually partitioning that, and what I mean by that is if it's not, you know, utilizing the protein for muscle protein synthesis, if it's not pushing the carbohydrates intramuscular to you know, improve your performance, if it's not pushing the dietary fats where they need to go, if it's not doing those things adequately and your body's not absorbing them sufficiently, any excess is just going to be expelled, and that kind of ties in with you know, sort of digestion motility, and also the motility of stool as well. So if you're finding that your digestion is impaired, you're finding that you're having, you know, some issues with your digestive system and you're passing off stool, so loose, very loose stool, or constipation or things like that, digestive stress such as a lot of bloating, a lot of cramping, all these different factors as well are probably a sign that your digestive system is it's had enough, it's starting to pack up. So we have to look at your digestion, and we have to look at your toilet habits, if you like, and that also ties in with insulin sensitivity, and this is, you know, a lot of the time one of the main factors that kind of determines we need to pull back. Now there's a few different ways that we can track this, such as taking your blood glucose levels, and that's just basically a morning reading that we can take with a finger prick, and that could tell us where you're sat with your blood glucose levels. You know, we want to be sat between sort of 4.5 to 5.5. Upper level wants to be 6. Once we're sort of above 6 nanomolar, then we're going to start to creep towards some issues with insulin resistance. And we don't want to go down that path. If we start really continuing to hammer that uptake of insulin, that pancreatic response, whilst you're beginning to build that resistance, you know, the extreme end of that is actually causing yourself type 2 diabetes. So once we start to find that those levels are increasing, or without even tracking it, we're simply just feeling fatigue, we're feeling maybe symptoms of feeling dizzy, we're eating carbohydrates and it's making us feel sleepy as opposed to, you know, keeping energy levels neutralized, that's a sign that we're starting to build some resistance to that sort of insulin pancreatic response. And that also just ties in with the whole fatigue thing, right? So fatigue is just going to be one of the main one, guys, to be honest with you. If you're starting to notice that fatigue is very high, that's because there's a lot of stress on the body. Your body's having to carry around a lot of body weight, and all these different factors we've just mentioned are just combination of those are just causing this high level of fatigue, and obviously that's going to impact your sleep as well. And that's kind of the final bit to focus on here, and that is of course sleep. Now, once we start getting to the point where, and you know, we have to appreciate if you're, you know, sub 10% body fat, you know, diet's in an immaculate place, your aerobic system's fantastic, your sleep's always going to be better than it is at the peak end of an off-season phase. So don't pull back the second sleep becomes impaired. But if we're getting to the point where you're just not sleeping at all, you're getting anxious about going to sleep because you know you're going to be waking every 5 minutes, you're potentially snoring, you're potentially suffering from sleep apnea, which is a relaxation of the nasal path, the valves that we need to breathe through, and it wakes you very frequently throughout the night. If you're suffering from any of these things and sleep is becoming impacted, majorly, it's definitely time to pull back, because sleep is absolutely paramount. And once you're at that heavier set point, your body's under a lot of stress. You know, people think your recovery is maximized, but in actual fact, your strength is maximized, but your recovery is actually at this point pretty much in the gutter, because if you're not sleeping efficiently, you're not going to be recovering. So that's definitely a good sign that it's time to pull back. So what I would say, guys, obviously a lot of pointers there. Now, you don't need to be suffering from every single one of those, but if you are, and this is kind of my rule of thumb with myself, with my athletes, with my clients, if you are suffering from at least 2 of those pointers, I would say it's probably time to pull back. You know, and in that pullback phase, what you'll find is as you start to pull body fat down, as you improve the aerobic system, you'll find aerobic fitness improves, you'll find your appetite improves, and all these other markers improve, and it will actually catapult your training forward. So don't see this as kind of like a mini cut as a time where you're pausing your results or your progress. actually think of it as a time where you're going to propel your progress, because as long as you initiate that recomposition phase or that diet phase in a well-structured way, you'll find that you should still be able to make, you know, consistent progress in your training, and it will actually benefit things in the long term. So that's when to pull back in a gaining phase, guys. Hope that was helpful. If anyone has any questions, just drop them in the comment section below, and we'll see you in the next one.